if you're trying to write a family history and you're staring at a blank page or you don't know what to do, let me introduce you to the secret weapons that's going to help you write so much faster. And that is a timeline. Timelines are great in genealogy research because they help you analyze whether the logistics and the transportation and the travel migration of your ancestors makes sense. But timelines for writers help you stay organized, and it serves as your outline. And my husband tells me all the time, if you don't write with an outline, you're never going to finish your project. And timeline is automatically your outline when writing. So let's dive into how we can move from writer's block and into writing stories. How are you going to actually create a timeline? Now, you could create a timeline using the old pen and paper method, or pencil would probably be better. You can do that. You can also create spreadsheets, and we've talked about how to create spreadsheets on our YouTube channel with a show notes follow-up. Be sure to check the link in the description so you can find that video as well. But how do you start? Well, all family history should be based on research. So I want you to research your ancestor. That seems like a no-brainer. But what you're going to do as you do research your ancestor is you're going to, every time you have a date and a place, you're going to add that as a custom fact in your genealogy online trees, or you're going to use that in your database. So here's the database look from Roots Magic, and before the screen before the left is Family Search and the right is Ancestry. So every time you have a date and a location and a source to back it up, I want you to go ahead and put those as custom facts. And if you don't know how to do that, be sure to ask in the comments below and I'll direct you to support material for that. When you have the time and location and the event in your timeline, you're ready to go. So build your timeline as you research. You are going to be so much happier when it gets time to write because you have the outline ready to go. But here's what I also want you to do. I want you to make sure that you're researching your ancestors' family. And these are siblings, these are cousins, these are children and parents and grandparents, because your ancestors' extended family could have an impact on their lives. So let's say the ancestor's four cousin and himself went to serve in the military. That's going to have a major impact on your ancestor's story as well as the family context. Let's say your ancestor's sibling married, their spouse gave birth to a child, and then their parent died all in the same year. That's pretty dramatic, right? So if we just talk about the fact that their child was born, that isn't a complete story of your ancestor. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we're researching our ancestors' family, and then we're adding their events and their lives to the online family trees as well as the genealogy software, because a lot of these programs, with the exception of bringing over cousins, but a lot of these genealogy softwares will bring in the events in a child, a spouse, a parent into the story. And then if you are creating these events in the extended family's lives and you know that it's happening around the time of your ancestor, you can manually add that information in later. Which brings me to the need to create a spreadsheet or draw a table on a piece of paper, because you can bring in the life events of the parents and the children and the spouses and the siblings, but sometimes those grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles need to come in as well. And a spreadsheet is going to be your best friend. Simply put a column for age. So start with a date, and then start with a date column. When did this event happen? And then have a column for the age they were when this event took place, because doing that math before you start writing is really going to put you in a better frame of mind to tell your ancestors' stories. Then include the event, and then you can include some details of what was taking place on those dates. Now, not only do you see the timeline, I like to color code my timeline. So up there you can see the green. Those are vital events: birth, marriage, death. I usually highlight those in green. The spouse, I'd use a different color. In this case, I used yellow. So they're going to share the marriage fact in green. But then if they die during their lifetime, you're going to see the death date in yellow. So you're going to have a birth and a death date for the spouse. Then I use blue for anything related to the children, and then I can use other colors for parents and for grandparents and cousins and uncles and so forth. You can see here, I've got the different color for the parents, and then I just left it blank for the events in their life, the residences, the land purchases, the military service. I just kind of left that blank. But what I'm not seeing here on this timeline, to take it one step further, if you want to go from just telling a bland story to a compelling family history, you need to add context. Historical context is the spice that makes your stories more interesting. If your ancestor was born the day after Fort Sumter was bombed and they're living in South Carolina, that's a pretty dramatic entry into the world. The world has gone crazy in the South of the United States. So you can think of other events in your ancestors' lives all throughout the world, some pretty dramatic events that really shape the context of the life into which they were born. And so when you add that historical context in, it really makes the story more interesting. So layer the historical context. You're going to look for local history. What is happening in the town or the county or even the state in which your ancestor lives? Most people are very myopic in their life. They only know what's going on in their lives before the age of the 24-hour news cycle. So incorporate local historical events into your ancestors' timeline. Next, I want you to overlay with national and world events. Think of how the War of the Roses impacted the nations that were involved in that battle. Now, sometimes you're adding world events that don't impact your ancestors' lives because it helps anchor your reader into a time and place. So if Stalin came to power on the day your ancestor got married, that's just a mental connection to the skeleton of world history where your readers can understand where there's a connection, even though it didn't necessarily impact your ancestor. So go ahead and put them on there. You can decide later how you're going to interweave those events into your story or leave them out. The next thing I think you should overlay onto your timeline is the technology of the day. I wouldn't necessarily include the date in which a Model T was invented unless your ancestor lived where those Model Ts were invented or worked for the factory. Because when they're invented, it doesn't really necessarily impact their life until later it's more utilized in the town. So how do you figure that out? Well, that's going to take a little bit of research into newspapers and looking for the technology of the day. And what you're looking for are ads. What are they trying to sell you in the local newspapers connected with some of the events in your ancestors' lives? And that's going to help you understand the technology people are either using, their neighbors are using, that they're seeing around town, something like that. You don't necessarily want to overlay with the date color photography was invented because it took a while for the market to actually start using it. So that's my little caveat on that. Now, these may not actually have dates associated with them, but I do want you to put a couple of these things on your timelines. If you understand the cultural practices of the time, what does the culture do when someone passes away? What does the culture do when someone is born? What are the customs that they do? What is the courting customs? What are the work customs? What jobs do certain people have? Are they allowed to have and not allowed to have? Just add that into your timeline. it may not necessarily be associated with a date. The next thing I think you should add is pop culture. Now, this time you can actually add the date a particular book was written, or a song was popular on the Billboard charts, or just around the town, because you want to add the sights and sounds, or the things that people are talking about. You know, they're talking about various books or not. Be careful when you get to the writing stage. Don't say your ancestor actually liked the song, but by adding a little bit of sound or the literature or the other pop culture activities that are taking place onto your timeline, you can understand your ancestor's world. But again, it goes back to your reader. So if your ancestor was a teenager who's about to graduate high school, and they may have watched the television show when Elvis is shaking his pelvis, then you've just helped your reader connect their teenage years, television being around, and a time point when, the rebellious youth are taking place. So go ahead and overlay with pop culture, because it can really help your reader understand what is happening in this world. Finally, it's 2022. Disasters, both health disasters and weather disasters, are important to incorporate into your stories, because the last 2 years, many of us have been noticing health disasters and weather disasters and how they've been impacting our lives. Well, the same thing impacts our ancestors' lives. There are a number of websites that actually track health and weather disasters, so be sure to be looking for those websites. And I'm going to call you to action. If you have some websites that you love that talk about health disasters and weather disasters and various culture and custom, go ahead and share those links in the comment section so all of us can go and check those out. Now, I can't cover everything you should put on your timeline. It's all going to depend on when you start getting into the time and place in which your ancestor lived. For instance, when I wrote about my grandpa Brown, and his book is actually off screen, I discovered that the football stadium on Ohio State campus, the plans were accepted for the Horseshoe Stadium around the time that my Ohio State Buckeye-loving grandfather was born. And so it was growing and having all this history at the same time he was growing into his childhood and adulthood. And then he was this loyal fan for a very long time. And then Woody Hayes, he lost his job the fall after my grandfather passed away. So that's a miscellaneous kind of thing. And you just kind of stumble into those things as you're doing research, but go ahead and when you find those, add them to your timeline. It could make your story really, really interesting. So as I said before, there's a lot of great websites that are going to talk to you about customs. They're going to talk to you about historical events. You just put in a lifespan and you can see what's happening. I'll have a number of these websites that I know about in the show notes, but use that comment section to share the ones that you've come across. Then once you have your timeline with all of these great things on it, it's time to start writing. You are going to be surprised how quickly you can write your family stories when you have your outline, which is a timeline. For more tips and tricks on how to write your family histories, be sure to go to our website, familyhistoryfanatics.com, go to blog, and then you're going to see a drop down for writing tips, and you're going to have all of the writing tips we've ever put out. I hope you now understand why timelines are really important, what to put on them, and then go ahead and start writing with them. If you have written a story or a family history and you leverage timelines, can you share your testimonial of how those timelines impacted your research writing in the comments below? We would all love to celebrate your success and learn from your journey as well. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.